Hey young friends, Dr. Bill here. As always, I'm glad that you've chosen to spend just a few moments with me as we continue to talk about the big names in the Bible. For the last several weeks, we have talked about the things that Jesus said and did, particularly as we find them in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew's Gospel. Well, today we come to the end of the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus concluded what he had to say by offering a parable, that is, a kind of word picture to drive home the importance of everything he said in the sermon. Here's how it reads. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. In this little parable, Jesus draws a pretty pointed contrast between rock and sand. Now, perhaps the best way I can illustrate this is by reminding you of the times maybe when you've been to the beach. And one of the things that we do when we go to the beach, besides paddling around in the surf or sitting under an umbrella or whatever, we will often take time to build a sandcastle. We'll grab up our pail and our shovel and we'll start trying to dig in the sand, and we'll try to make an elaborate structure, a big castle. And after we've worked hard, we stand back and we look and say, wow, there it is, and it's really, really pretty neat. But you know what happens? Overnight, the tide will come in, and no matter how hard we have worked on that sandcastle, and no matter how hard we've tried to make it last, well, it just won't. The tide will come in and the water will erase that sandcastle as if it never even existed. But maybe you've been to a seashore that has been lined with rocks, boulders, and no matter how many times the waves beat against it, no matter how hard the sea beats against it, those rocks just don't move. Well, that's kind of the point of what Jesus was saying here. He said, if you hear these words but don't act on them, well, it's like a person who builds a house on sand. And whenever the water comes in, whenever the storms come, well, it erases the sand and the house falls. But if we build our house on rock, well, the chances are when a great storm comes, nothing will move that house. It will stand tall even in the midst of a great storm. Now, Jesus told this parable because he wanted to stress how important it was not just for us to hear what he had to say, but to act on it. Notice how Jesus began. He said, everyone who hears these words and acts on them, they will be like a person who built a house on a rock foundation. So that's a pretty tall order, isn't it? What Jesus is saying to us is that as important as it is to hear what he says and maybe even be able to quote or recite some of the things he said, nothing is more important than putting it into action. Doing what Jesus said. Doing what he wants us to do. That's a tall order. But the promise in these verses is that if we do indeed act on what Jesus has taught us, our lives will be strong and sure. We will build lives that last. We will build lives that will be able to withstand whatever comes our way, and we will not fall. That's a really encouraging word for us to hear as Jesus brings the Sermon on the Mount to a conclusion. Well, beginning next week, we'll take we'll start taking a look at some of the other things that Jesus taught and said. But in particular, we'll pay attention to some of his other parables, some of his other word pictures. I look forward to seeing you then. I know school is just about to start, so I hope you're enjoying these last days of summer. And as the new school year gets underway, I wish you much success and much accomplishment. Take care. God bless. Bye-bye.